Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. And as always, I hope that you enjoy.
The Path of Water, Fire, Iron, and Darkness, posted by Zheng Lao. It was easy game for the elves to remove humans from the great continent. The time it took for the elves to decide to be rid of the unfortunate lesser beings was several times longer than the time to act on said decision. The humans in every way disadvantaged compared to the elves were deemed too impure to be sharing lands with the perfect beings. This much was obvious when the elves watched the first humans crawl out of the caverns. Elves were an ancient race, beautiful, wise, long-lived, with natural capabilities of magic. Human upstarts were ugly, ignorant, mortal, and couldn't so much as lift a pebble without grabbing it first. Scarcely better than beasts, elves argued. Of course, the humans took it poorly when the elves told them to leave the great continent. The human kingdom, so inclined to fight one another, set aside their differences for the first time to confront their superior men. Such resolve would only be in vain, as the elves beat down the human armies with impunity. The war, if it could be considered that, ended before the turn of the season. With their armies and castles in ruins, the humans had no other choice but to concede to elven demands. They would leave their ancestral home, a land of plenty that had nurtured them since the start of their history, and take to unending waters of the high seas. It was a thinly veiled death sentence for humankind. The elves saw it as such, and the humans knew it. The elves had always shown disgust towards them, but to commit outright genocide against them would be dirtying their hands of the pure and noble elves. The sea would do for the elves what they themselves couldn't stomach. In the face of inevitable doom, many humans lost themselves in despair. Some begged for elves for forgiveness for whatever sins they had unwittingly committed. Others prayed to the gods for divine strength. Others still decided to simply spend their final days with their loved ones before ending their own lives. But of all the forms of madness that came, the most unbelievable came when one human came forth, a man who had no noble rank or God-given powers. A man who was born and had always lived with nothing, and thus had nothing to lose. "Humanity will find its path," he stated with great pride and certainty. With only his own 2 hands as tools, he made a raft with little more than wooden logs and rope. A single glance was enough for one to see that his raft was the furthest thing from seaworthy, and yet the absurd man still pushed it into the water. In full view of both elves and humans, he embraced his exile, fading into the horizon. The elves laughed at this display. While it was their idea from the beginning to make the half-evolved ape-men drown in the oceans, they did not expect a man so wild as to believe that he had a chance at surviving. This particular brand of madness would soon turn out to be infectious. Within days, word of the mad raft man spread to the ears of the surviving humans. While some decried the man as a buffoon that he was, others began to take his words to heart. The human began to build ships with timber and cloth, putting together what little resources and wit they still had so that they could take to the seas. Tricking themselves into hoping, they sailed into the unending waters. The elves laughed even more. They had done it. They had rid themselves of the vile lesser species that had tainted their lands with their greed, lust, and infighting. The very last of humankind had left the great continent to drown in the unending waters, never to return. Once more the elves would have their lands of paradise to themselves so that they may live in eternal peace. And live in peace they did. The elves had long done away with fighting one another, and with the embrace of humans gone, there was no need for warfare anymore. The ancient race ushered into another era of peace and prosperity. They committed themselves to the wisdom of the libraries and the appreciation of all things beautiful in life, just as they had before the human ulcer emerged. Despite their long lives, even elves were subject to the cycle of life. Eventually the elves who had watched the last humans leave finally grew old, making way to the next generation. As fewer and fewer of the old remained, the memories of the imperfect men began to fade. As time passed, however, the elves found themselves growing increasingly dissatisfied. They began to feel melancholy. The world around them began to lose color. Plants and flowers, once vibrant and colorful, began to merge into a dull gray. The very sky itself had become engulfed in the dark clouds of ash. The elves searched through their libraries for an answer. They looked to the wisdom of sages and forebearers, but no analog could be found in the accounts of their race. They cast their magic to clear the skies, only for it to darken again in a matter of days. They searched for peace of mind and beauty, but the purity of nature the elves so dearly cherished had faded. Desperately they sought a remedy for the dying of the light of their world. They found their answer, or more accurately, the answer came to them. Melancholy quickly gave way to dread. The answer came from the unending waters of the sea, trailing smoke as though it were on fire. Ships made from cold refined iron, belching darkness that clouded the sun. An amalgamation of everything the elves were not, impure, vile, contaminating, embodying imperfection and sin. Deprived of land, magic, beauty, and wisdom, they worked with water, fire, iron, and darkness. The humans had found their path.
The algorithm reckons you should be watching this video next, and I recommend that you should be always watching my video. So, click with energy! And yes, clicking that does help the channel. Thank you very much. I just want to quickly thank the T5 channel members and patrons. Alithia, Barky, Tryagain95, Beauty Cure, Meridian117, Cam Maxwell, Casper Arnholt, Jordan Bucksborn, Angry Marine, Albard Gusta, Savage Patch Papa, and Arcadian.